The movie starts with a peaceful scene where a young girl named Mary Black is happily playing with her cat, Shining, in the woods. Everything seems calm at first, but then Shining runs away. Mary chases after him, and sadly, a child murderer takes her life, changing her family's world forever. On a quiet Christmas Eve at a New York police station, officers Hawkins and Pine arrive, drenched from the rain. They annoy Gullowy, the desk officer who likes to keep the station clean. In another room, Jane Hollows and Toby Sherwood are busy with paperwork, getting a bit too close to each other. Hawkins and Pine enter, teasing them and complaining about the poor phone reception due to a recent storm, which doesn't help their holiday mood. In another room, Detective Alexander Black listens to a sad voicemail from his wife, who says she needs a break from their strained relationship. Their relationship has been troubled since the death of their daughter, Mary. Losing Mary has deeply affected him, especially because he is a detective and couldn't save his own child. This failure haunts him, making his personal and work life difficult. Soon after, a mysterious man enters the station. He goes to Gullowy and says he wants to confess to a murder. Scared and worried, Gullowy quickly calls for the other officers. The team gathers, and Detective Black takes charge, making sure the man is taken to an interrogation room. He also scolds Gullowy for pulling his weapon too soon. Just then, emergency responders arrive, reporting a big accident on the interstate. They say it will take all night to clear and that they need to close the nearby off-ramp and reroute traffic. Curious about the man's unclear confession, Hawkins asks him who he killed. The man replies with confusing mind games that annoy Hawkins. Then, Black steps in and takes over the questioning, asking the man for his name. The man mysteriously says he is nobody, making Black think it's a joke and warns him about the legal trouble of lying. But the man makes Black uneasy by saying he will prove he is guilty of murder by the end of the night. Feeling worried, Black tells the officers to do the usual processing for Mr. Nobody, including taking fingerprints and photos, to see if he's known to the police. While they get ready, Mr. Nobody suddenly stands up, notices Black's pin engraved with, "To the best daddy in the world," and coldly admits he has killed 6 people. In a lighter scene, Jane and Toby pretend to kiss under the mistletoe. Their playful moment stops suddenly when Jane sees the ghostly figure of Mr. Nobody at the door, startling her and ending their flirting. Back with Hawkins, a creepy moment happens as he thinks he sees blood coming from Mr. Nobody's head while taking his photo, but when he looks again, there is nothing. The mystery grows when Pine tries to fingerprint him and finds out Mr. Nobody has no fingerprints. Gullowy is told to lock Mr. Nobody away. As they walk down the dark hallway, the lights flicker. After locking Mr. Nobody in his cell, Gullowy hears him whistling a spooky tune and turns to see Mr. Nobody walking towards him again, even though he was just locked up. When Gullowy rushes back to check, he finds Mr. Nobody still in the cell, making the mystery even stranger. In Black's office, Pine and Hawkins report the strange news that Mr. Nobody has no fingerprints, wondering how this can be. The flickering lights add to their frustration, and Gullowy says all the spare bulbs are broken. Angry, Hawkins looks at Mr. Nobody's mugshots, which show only his clothes, with his head and hands missing. Hawkins decides to confront Mr. Nobody, who still claims to be nobody. Hawkins then asks about the song Mr. Nobody whistled, which is Mozart's Requiem, the Death Mass. Disturbed, Hawkins quickly leaves the room. At the same time, Black has a tough phone call with his wife. Spending Christmas away from his family and their troubled relationship makes it hard to connect with his kids. He remembers Mary and gets more upset. He tells Pine to bring Mr. Nobody in for more questions. But Hawkins seems distracted and unhelpful. As they go to the cell, the lights flicker again, suggesting danger. When they reach cell number 4, it's empty. They find Mr. Nobody in cell 3 instead, with a deck of cards, adding to the mystery. Meanwhile, Hawkins is smoking and thinking about a past event where they forced a confession from a drifter accused of killing Mary. Pine comes over, and Hawkins says Mr. Nobody looks a lot like that drifter. He feels uneasy about their past actions connecting to this strange night. Pine doesn't worry and suggests they get drinks after work to relax. In the interrogation room, Mr. Nobody describes his first murder, a woman with blue hair and a red dress. While he talks, Hawkins checks the cells, not knowing what's coming. As Mr. Nobody continues his story, Hawkins finds himself locked in a dark cell, thinking it's a joke by Gullowy. But a shadowy figure appears, torturing Hawkins and cutting out his tongue with the missing scissors. Hawkins' scream echoes through the station, but help comes too late. Hawkins is found dead, tied to the window, with his back tattoo, as described by Mr. Nobody, visible. Meanwhile, Black returns to the interrogation room and sees that Mr. Nobody's handcuffs are mysteriously undone. He quickly secures them again and locks the room, then tells the others about Hawkins' death. He sends Pine and Gullowy outside to check the area. In the heavy rain, something hits Gullowy's head. To their shock, it's Shining, Mary's dead cat. Despite this scary discovery, Pine insists they check the roof. When they come back inside, they carefully tell Black about the cat, avoiding any direct mention of Mary to spare his feelings. But the strange finding makes them speak up. Pine reveals that Hawkins felt uneasy because Mr. Nobody looked like the drifter they forced into a false confession. This triggers a flashback of their brutal interrogation, where they nearly killed the drifter out of desperation and Black's forced order to get a confession by any means. Black had ended the torture by stabbing the man with the pin given to him by Mary. Their misuse of power was clear, a haunting memory they all wished to forget. As they recall their actions, Black apologizes with regret. Toby tries to justify their past actions by suggesting Mary might have been alive then, but Gullowy angrily reveals the truth. Mary was already dead, killed by someone else who was later shot by the state police. The drifter they tortured was innocent. Anger flares as Gullowy confronts Toby, even pulling out a shotgun. Black intervenes, saying they are all to blame for that night. Gullowy then reveals that the drifter is in a coma in Crestdale, a burden they carry because of Black's false story of self-defense. During this tense moment, loud thuds and footsteps come from the roof. Black sends Pine and Gullowy to check the noise while he stays with the couple to watch Mr. Nobody. On the roof, Pine and Gullowy split up, giving the mysterious presence a chance to act. As Mr. Nobody talks about his second victim, a coward punished for doing nothing, Rope catches Gullowy, echoing his past inaction during the drifter's torture. In a painful memory, Gullowy is seen as a silent observer, feeling guilty but too scared to act. When Pine returns, he finds no sign of Gullowy. As Gullowy faces his final moments, the rope reminds him of when he once hoisted the innocent drifter who had begged for his life. Just like that, Gullowy meets his end. This chilling event makes them suspect Mr. Nobody's involvement in the strange happenings, even though he's locked up. They quickly move him to another cell, but not before he says blasphemous things that seem connected to the tragedies in the station. Black uses this time to ask Mr. Nobody about Mary, whose murder a year ago still haunts them. He remembers the drifter they caught in similar circumstances, a man who also had no fingerprints. But Mr. Nobody gives no clear answers. This makes Pine want to check the drifter's condition, thinking he might still be part of the ongoing horror. At Crestdale Care Center, Pine learns that the drifter died at exactly 8:15 p.m. that evening, the same time Mr. Nobody was brought in by Gullowy. This news shocks the team. With their phones not working, they can't call for help. Black decides they need to go out and get help themselves. They split into teams. The couple heads out into the severe storm to find the stormtroopers, discovering their vehicle parked near the forest. Back at the station, Pine and Black return to Mr. Nobody, who continues his eerie confession. He hints at another possible victim, making Black urgently tell Pine to contact the couple by radio. Meanwhile, Jane and Toby, checking out the trooper vehicle, hear haunting radio transmissions about Mary's tragic fate, a year-old broadcast playing again. Toby, going deeper into the woods, unknowingly steps into a deadly trap. In a terrifying twist, as Mr. Nobody describes the fate of his next victim, Toby experiences it in real life. Dragged into the forest, he is gruesomely struck in the abdomen with a shovel, the same tool he used against the drifter. Mortally wounded, he dies alone. Jane, back at the car, finds Toby's brutalized body, ending their romance in the saddest way. Terrified, she rushes back to the station. Panicked, Jane loses control of the car and crashes. She hurries to Pine and Black, telling them about Toby's death. Black then realizes that Mr. Nobody's confessions are not just stories. They become real, deadly events. He recalls how executioners used to isolate themselves after their work, fearing the spirits of those they executed. They think the drifter has come back as Mr. Nobody to get revenge. As they deal with the terror, Blame shifts to Black for starting the harsh interrogation of the drifter. Black defends himself, saying he was desperate to save his daughter. They decide to escape in Jane's car, but the vengeful spirit causes a crash. Mr. Nobody starts another dark confession as Jane is trapped in the car, struggling to breathe. The windows won't break, despite Pine and Black's efforts. As she suffocates, a flashback shows her suffocating the drifter, mirroring her fate. After the tragic deaths, Pine, angry and desperate, confronts Mr. Nobody. The encounter turns deadly as Mr. Nobody attacks him in the cell, mirroring the cruelty inflicted on the drifter. In a gruesome act of revenge, Mr. Nobody gouges out Pine's eye, following the saying, "An eye for an eye." When Black arrives, Pine is unrecognizable. Overwhelmed with grief at the loss of his team, Black is left devastated. The night's horrors leave Black disoriented, wandering the streets, haunted by visions of Mr. Nobody. Despite trying to escape the nightmare, he is drawn back to the station. There, Mr. Nobody greets him with, "All roads lead here tonight," meaning the place where their dark history began is where it will end. As Mr. Nobody starts another confession, Black interrupts, confessing his guilt toward an innocent man. But then, in a shocking twist, Black reveals the man was not innocent. He was Mary's murderer and a child killer. Black had always thought he was innocent, a misunderstanding that fueled the man's desire for revenge after a year in a coma, filled with vengeful dreams that became real. Now, Mr. Nobody is ready to confess again, with Black as his final victim. As Mr. Nobody prepares to kill Black, Black quickly uses his pen to stab his ears, stopping him from hearing his own confession. Black hides under his office table and sees a vision of Mary, who offers to help. She tells him the secret to defeating Mr. Nobody, saying his real name, which he hates. With this knowledge and Mary's guidance, Black faces the attacker, declaring his name is Stanley Harperton. Surprised and weakened by hearing his own name, Stanley is distracted, allowing Black to shoot him. Stanley's physical form is wounded and vanishes. The film ends with Black having a brief, emotional reunion with Mary, finally finding the peace they both deserve. So the moral of the story is, if a mysterious dude with no fingerprints starts confessing murders and playing mind games, maybe just call in sick and let someone else deal with it.